of you today. Beware of those who tell you that nothing that you have done matters. The reason that Joe Biden is not at the top of the nomination of the Democratic Party is because of you, my friends. The reason why Kamala Harris is not presiding on Benjamin Netanyahu, the war criminal speech in Congress today, is because of you. The reason why dozens of members of Congress are boycotting the war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu is because of you. Don't let anyone take your small victories from you. Your work matters. Your sacrifices matter. Your mobilizations, you coming outside, matters, and it is not in vain. I want to say to the young people, those who sacrifice their scholarships, their graduations, their future employments for the people of Palestine, that will not be in vain. Don't be surprised that a war criminal has been invited by a country that harbors our own war criminals. And at the top of that list is President Joe Biden. We got a lot of work to do and nothing changes. It doesn't matter who the presumptive nominee is for the Democratic Party. You stay outside. You stay focused. You don't get distracted. We want a weapons embargo. We want to end military aid to Israel. We want unconditional aid to the people of Gaza. We want to rebuild Gaza, and we want to end the genocide against the Palestinian people. So let us be very clear. Our votes are still to be earned. We will not be pawns in a political system that does not give us the demands that not only we deserve, but are the right thing to do for these political entities. And lastly, I will say this. There is nothing that any of us here are sacrificing that is close to the sacrifices of the Palestinian people. And I promise you here today that one day all of us will travel to a free Palestine and we will sit on the beaches of Gaza and watch the children of Gaza play, enjoy under bright skies, and it will be because the American people said no to genocide and yes to freedom for the Palestinian people.
If you open your phones, you'll see the entire area surrounding the Capitol is an utter gridlock, thanks to the organization and unity of the people and their determination. Hang in tight. We only have a couple more speakers before we join our comrades in the streets and show Netanyahu and the other criminals what we're about today. Next, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce from Doctors Against Genocide, Dr. Nida Jabbour, who will introduce the speaker from Doctors Against Genocide. Please, please give it up for them.
Hello, everyone. Hello, the real patriot Americans, the people of conscience, and shame on the others who are complicit in genocide. عاشت غزة. Long live Gaza. We are here to tell the people in Gaza, the children, the women, the elderly, the men, that Doctors Against Genocide are with you. We are here for you. All the people of conscience are here speaking your voice loud. I'm introducing Dr. Karama Hawash, the co-founder of Doctors Against Genocide. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to tell you what Doctors Against Genocide is all about. We are uplifting the medical community voices against war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. We identified the genocide in Gaza very early on because genocide is a health hazard. It kills people. And we are seeing how our colleagues in Gaza are being killed. The hospitals are being destroyed. The children are being maimed. The women with infants are being starved. The men are killed and watching their families being obliterated. Dr. Jumana Hinti is one of our members. I am honored to introduce her. She came back from Gaza on the 21st of May.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. So as you just heard, I came back from Gaza from a medical mission in May. And there I witnessed all the massacres, all the atrocities that are being committed every day with our own tax money. I've seen the children who are shot in their heads and their legs and burnt, 70% of their bodies or more burnt, maggots coming out of their wounds, people with multiple fractures, they can't have surgery because there are no surgical supplies. Women with no medical care who are having strokes because they're not taking their medications. All those atrocities that tell us that the death rate that we hear about and the Congress does not believe is actually, yes, we don't believe it too. It's much higher than what they report. I also befriended and was working with so many healthcare workers there who are the most amazing people I've ever seen in my life. Some of them were taken hostages and tortured and then sent down from the north to the south without knowing anything about their families. And then they committed their life to volunteer at the hospital, at the European hospital. And after I left, a few weeks later, the European hospital was evacuated. And that was extremely devastating for them and for me, totally devastating. Now they're out in the streets. They don't have anywhere to go. They can't volunteer even because there are not that many functional hospitals that they can work at. And so the atrocities keeps getting worse and worse and worse. The healthcare structure over there is completely disseminated. Shame. So I have a few messages today. One, the first message is for you, the great people who have come from all around the states, and the people who couldn't come, but they continue to work there every day to support and stop this genocide, to support the people of Gaza and stop the genocide. I also would like to tell Congress to stop denying that it's a genocide. Welcoming a war criminal and a genocide maniac to Congress is shameful. Shame on you. To our colleagues in healthcare here in the United States who are denying the atrocities that are being committed every day, and our medical organizations that have not said a word condemning the genocide. Shame on you. History is being written, and we all know when we assure you that you are on the wrong side of history. And last but not least, to our beautiful people of Gaza, we will never surrender. We will never stop fighting for you. Stay strong. We are with you, and most importantly, Allah is with you. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Long live Gaza!
Long live Gaza!
Gaza will prevail!
Gaza will prevail!
Gaza shall prevail!
Gaza shall prevail!
War criminals should be held accountable.
War criminals should be held accountable.
Thank you.
One more time to our brave doctors against genocide. Just so you guys know, all the blockades that we've been talking about throughout the day, all sorts of people have been involved in them. One of the blockades was led by the students in the area, the same students who not weeks ago were dealt the heavy hand of police repression, both from the federal government and local authorities when they brutalized them on George Washington's campus. Why? For speaking up against Palestine. Yes, shame. And so it is my deep honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker from the DMV Students for Justice in Palestine Coalition. Please give it up for Noor.
Congress painted red. 186,000 dead. Bibi, you can't run away. The Intifada's here to stay. I'm speaking on behalf of the DMV Coalition for Students for Justice in Palestine. We are a union of SJP chapters across 8 DC, Maryland, and Virginia universities organizing for the liberation of the Palestinian people and the land from the Zionist settler colonial occupation of Palestine. As anti-imperialist student organizers, we know that the neoliberal university is a fundament to the empire. Packaged as bubbles of intellectual freedom and critical dialogue, our universities in reality are designed to groom us into cogs of the imperial machine, with our academic programs systematically funneling us into jobs with weapons manufacturers, the federal government, banks, mainstream media outlets, and the US military. Shame! When we exercise our intellectual freedom and build spaces for critical dialogue, the very values our university claims to fundamentally uphold, we are met with surveillance from the FBI, arbitrarily punished and dealt with kangaroo courts by our students' conduct hearings, and physical brutality from the state and university police departments. Shame. All for speaking out about Palestine, students at the George Washington University are experiencing the collusion between the university and the imperial state firsthand. From the brutal May 8th raid of the DMV SJP encampment to Foggy Bottom's request that student organizers maintain a stay-away zone. They cannot step foot on their own campus. The actions of the state against our comrades has been dictated by the will of the university to protect its capitals and its interests and collusion with the Zionist regime. We call on our community to call out GW's racist and repressive administration. It is not lost on us that Bibi Netanyahu, an internationally wanted genocidal war criminal, can walk freely in our city, while our peers are banned by their university and our fascist government from their own neighborhoods for the very crime of calling out genocide. It is not lost on us that the same NYPD officers that have repeatedly brutalized our comrades at CUNY and Columbia are right here in DC now. Shame. It is not lost on us that the occupation army, which decapitates babies, trained the very cops which executed Sonia Massey in her own home. Shame. The past few months have sharpened the contradictions of the state and the neoliberal university. Our universities and the state brand us as outside agitators in our own homes when we dare to oppose their material interests. They surveil, brutalize, and evict us to protect their capital while celebrating fascist mass murderers from Linda Thomas Greenfield, Lauren Bobbitt, to the whole of NATO, to Bibi Netanyahu behind us. Invoking the Palestinian revolutionary and martyr Hassan Khanafani, as students of conscience, it is our duty to strike and damage imperialism wherever it manifests, especially within our universities. We operate in service of the world revolution, in service of realizing liberation and justice for all colonized, imperialized, and exploited peoples. We call on all students, all people of conscience, to get organized in the collective struggle for liberation from the imperialist death machine. The imperial beast is nothing more than a paper tiger. It appears tough, but in reality, it is a flammable, pathetic creature that can be knocked over and destroyed by a gust of wind. From DC to Bangladesh to Palestine, the student intifada is underhand. It is undefeated. Our victory is inevitable. Liberation is inevitable. Free, free Palestine. Free, free, free Palestine. Free, free Gaza. Free, free, free Gaza. Thank you.
Free Palestine! I want you all to give a warm welcome here as we start to round out our program to Malak from the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation!
Good morning, DC. Today is a profoundly distressing day to be a Palestinian in America. Over the past 9 months, the Biden administration has dishonored the principle America claims to stand for. The Palestinian Assembly for Liberation not only condemns, but is disgusted by the visit of Benjamin Netanyahu to Congress. The United States has shamefully welcomed a war criminal to speak in the halls of its so-called democracy. Let me be clear. We oppose all interactions with the settler colonial regime of Israel. We are witnessing a 9 months of an ongoing genocide orchestrated by Netanyahu, with reports indicating the murder of 186,000 Palestinians. It is shameful that the United States, instead of denouncing these actions, has openly embraced Netanyahu, a man who has orchestrated the slaughter of Palestinians. The U.S. has not only welcomed Netanyahu, but has also provided tens of billions of dollars in weapons, thus complicit in these crimes. The blood of innocent Palestinians stains their hands, and this support is nothing short of disgraceful. U.S. leaders have chosen to amplify the voice of a genocidal war criminal over their own citizens, forcing us to hold this nation accountable for its unconditional support of the atrocities against Palestinians. To every politician who welcomed Netanyahu and endorsed further financial support for Israel, you too are complicit in this genocide and will be remembered as war criminals. And come November, we all will remember the politicians that turned a blind eye to the massacres of the Palestinian children. The time for silence is over. We must stand against all those who are complicit in this genocide. The world is watching, and so are we. The revolution is here, and it's promising a near liberation and right to return for all Palestinians. And today, I confidently say that Palestine is almost free.
Give it up one more time for Malak. I have the honor of introducing a member of one of our strongest, fiercest youth organization on Turtle Island in the U.S. and Canada. Give it up for the Palestinian Youth Movement, who've been holding down our streets, holding down our campuses, holding down our elected officials. Give it up for Ibtihal.
Comrades and friends, it has been 292 days of the most horrific and enraging violence against our people in Gaza. We gathered here on November 4th after witnessing unspeakable horrors carried out on the Palestinian people. Yet here we are, 9 months later, reeling from the somehow even more gut-wrenching violence of the last couple weeks. The massacres that have taken place in refugee camps and schools and hospitals show us the true depravity of the Zionist project and the nature of this US-funded and orchestrated Israeli genocide of our people in Gaza. Let it be known to the war criminals sitting in the high seats of Congress, your legacy has been laid bare for all to see. Joe Biden's legacy will be recorded in the history books as the butcher of Gaza. He will be remembered for the hundreds of thousands of massacres that he signed off on and enabled, like those that came before him. Like those that came before him, he will be remembered for the bombing of hospitals and universities, of medics and professors, of children and their families. This government and this country is dripping with the blood of millions from Palestine to Iraq to Vietnam. The extermination of Palestinians is clearly a bipartisan project. The only thing that brings both parties of this nation together are issues of war and destruction that advance their greedy interests in the Arab region. Benjamin Netanyahu has made his genocidal intentions in Palestine clear for decades, and he has personally overseen the bombardment of Gaza time and time again. This is the same criminal who peddled the lie that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And now, in 2024, his intentions are just as clear as he carries out the wholesale slaughter of our people in Gaza. Netanyahu has literally and figuratively dumped his dirty laundry at the doorstep of this country, and now here in DC, he finds himself at home amongst other war-loving criminals who would gladly bankroll his genocidal intent in their attempts to destroy our region. But we stand here to show Netanyahu and all the members of Congress the blood of the Palestinian people is not cheap. When we see footage of children clutching the shoes of their dead parents, of incinerated children who have been burned beyond recognition, of parents holding the remnants of their children in plastic bags, we have not grown desensitized. We have only grown angrier. We have only grown more committed and more organized. We bear witness to the murder of Hind Rajab and Rifat al-Arair and Rushdie Sarraj. We bear witness to the thousands still trapped under the rubble. We bear witness to the assassinations of our journalists, of our healthcare workers, our educators, our engineers. We bear witness to the testimonies from our prisoners, those that we know about and those who have been disappeared. We bear witness to the murder of our mothers, to the murder of our fathers, to the murder of our siblings, and to the murder of our children. And not only do we bear witness, we remain committed to our struggle. Our struggle is one of dignity and honor and steadfastness. Just as our people are insistent on life, just as they have already started to rebuild structures as the bombing continues, or pitch tents atop the rubble of their homes, we learn and affirm life from them. So we gather here in the thousands, and we will continue to gather and continue to protest. We will continue to occupy spaces in the names of our martyrs, block bridges to force this country to reckon with what they are doing, and bring Palestine with us wherever we go. From Hinds Hall to Shuhada Square, there is nothing you can do to stop the will of the people. We will continue to carry the struggle forward. We will not rest until we see a liberated Gaza, until our prisoners are free, until we see a free Palestine from the river to the sea.
Are you ready to march? Come on, y'all. I said, are you ready to march? We're going to start marching out in this direction here to well, you see where I'm pointing here, to Constitution and 3rd, to my left, your left, my right, stage left or right, one of them. Just go to your left. We're marching out there. Let's move orderly in that direction, down Constitution and 3rd. You'll already see people moving behind the banners. Also, please give a big round of applause for our interpreters, our sign language interpreters.
So just move here, out in this direction, and you'll see as we continue to gather. Free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live Gaza! Free, free Palestine!
And as we know today, it is not the end of our struggle, but just another step. Next month, the Democratic National Convention is taking place in Chicago, and you can bet tens of thousands of us will assemble there in resistance like we have here today, and rejection of the Democrats and the genocidal agenda. I hope to see you there. And as day 300 of this genocide approaches in just a few weeks, stay tuned for more announcements and more action items. Because again, the struggle does not end here. The struggle continues and will continue until every last inch of Palestine is free. Free, free Palestine!
That's right, free Palestine! You can see from the flow of the crowd, but we're just moving here as we gather and continue and begin to start our march.
Siguli swagwag gal hindi niyo get wagi sli wagi ni wakitoloda oni dag ngwa wenage oni bojo tanse okinapi how yanko yukotono. And again, welcome
This
in.
is Democracy Now!
A couple things. Of course, today Netanyahu is supposed to be addressing the U.S. Congress. And so there's been protests against it to say we don't accept it. And so I can't, whoops. Okay. Helps if I have my mic on. Sigoli swag gela hindi niyo gets wagi sli wagi ni wakidoloda oni daag and gwehwenage oni bojo tanse okinapi. So today Netanyahu is supposed to be speaking to the U.S. Congress. It's it's kind of one of those things where it's hard to believe that it's actually possible that the U.S. would consider allowing this to happen. So here's the other thing that's just happened with that aside from that protest, is there's another protest where Palestinian and Jewish activists were putting on a rally to say, the Jewish are saying, of course, not in my name. And the U.S. government decided to send in the Capitol Police to arrest the 400 of the activists. So I'm going to give a real quick clip here from, this was posted 2 hours ago on Democracy Now! So we'll give this a listen and see what they have to say. There's a couple of representatives that have appeared on here.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. This is War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. In Washington, D.C., thousands of protesters are planning to march on Capitol Hill today, busing in from around the country to protest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to a joint session of Congress. There were a number of protests on Tuesday. On Capitol Hill, 400 Jewish activists, including over a dozen rabbis, were arrested during a sit-in inside the Capitol to protest Netanyahu's visit and to demand an immediate U.S. weapons embargo on Israel. The protest was organized by Jewish Voice for Peace.
I'm a Jewish American. My grandparents survived the Holocaust, and growing up I was always told that we should never let anything like the Holocaust happen again. That's why I'm here today protesting the genocide of the Palestinian people and calling on our government to enact an arms embargo on Israel and send no more weapons to the Israeli military.
We're here to say we don't want our tax dollars funding genocide. We are willing to put our bodies on the line to say that our Jewish values and our values as people mean that we cannot be funding them.
Voices from the Jewish Voice for Peace sit-in inside the Capitol Tuesday. Palestinians in Gaza have also criticized U.S. lawmakers for inviting Netanyahu to address Congress. Kazem Abu Taha is a displaced Palestinian from Rafah.
Netanyahu is embraced by the Americans. He is being provided with meals, food, and drinks. He is being hosted in Congress while we are being killed and slaughtered. We are being slaughtered by American planes, American ships, American tanks, and American troops. Everything that we are killed with is American. Biden blesses any operation and any killing and any massacre. The U.S. blesses it, Congress blesses it, Biden blesses it, and the White House blesses it. So the United States is not a partner. It is the reason for the war.
We're joined right now by three guests taking part in this week's protests. Noah Grayevsky is an Israeli-born member of Jewish Voice for Peace. Linda Sarsour is a Palestinian-American Muslim organizer attending today's mass protest. And Beth Miller is the political director of Jewish Voice for Peace Action. Beth, let's begin with you. Describe what you did yesterday and what your demands are. Now, dozens of Congress members and senators, not to mention Kamala Harris herself, who is the person who would be presiding over this joint session of Congress, but because Netanyahu is addressing, will not be there.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, Amy. Yesterday, Jewish Voice for Peace organized a sit-in at the Capitol to make it very clear that we, as American Jews, think it is absolutely shameful that congressional leadership has invited a war criminal who is currently leading a genocide of Palestinians in Gaza to address a joint session of Congress. It is an affront to the ideals of human rights and of freedom and of democracy. And in this moment, in this week, we felt it was absolutely critical. Jewish Voice for Peace organized this protest to make clear that we, as Jewish Americans, are speaking out and saying that this cannot happen in our name, and more specifically to make clear that we need to keep the focus on what our government is doing. We are not simply watching something terrible unfold in Gaza. The Biden administration and Congress have sent weapons and billions of dollars in military funding to the Israeli government that is using those weapons and using that funding to carry out a slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. Almost 40,000 people killed, including 15,000 children. Starvation. We're on the brink of famine in Gaza. And so the message of this protest was to say, we are calling for an arms embargo now. Our government, the United States government, has to end its complicity in this genocide. And if we want to reach a desperately needed ceasefire, that means we need to pressure the Israeli government, pressure the Netanyahu regime, and say, enough. We are not sending any more weapons. We're enacting an arms embargo now. And that was the clear message of this protest.
And Beth Miller, in previous years, there's been basically complete unanimity in Congress in support of Israeli actions. How do you assess what is happening this time, especially in terms of members of Congress either staying away or voicing their displeasure and their opposition to Netanyahu's speech?
Yes, for so many years, there has been wall-to-wall, bipartisan, unquestioning complicity in Israel's atrocities and human rights abuses against Palestinians. And right now, I think what we're seeing is that more and more Democrats in Congress are starting to catch up to where the Democratic voting base is. Most Democrats do not want to see our tax dollars funding human rights abuses, apartheid, and now genocide in Gaza. And so you see, what we're seeing now is more and more Democrats who are seeing that actually Americans and the Democratic voting base is done with this. We are fed up and we are taking action and we are demanding an end to this complicity. And for that reason, we're seeing more and more Democrats start to take a stand. And so right now, today, that means people who are going to be boycotting or protesting that speech, and we applaud all of the members of Congress who are boycotting and protesting this speech. That is absolutely what needs to happen. And there are other things as well. Members of Congress who, for example, chose to vote no on the additional military supplemental bill that passed in April. Members of Congress who are speaking out and calling for a ceasefire and calling for an end to this, the complicity of our government.
I'd like to bring in Linda Sarsour as well. Linda, could you talk about your reaction, especially to the decision of Vice President Kamala Harris to be absent in Congress from this speech by Netanyahu?
Thank you, Juan. I want to send a message to our movements. We have created the political circumstances to make standing behind Benjamin Netanyahu, a war criminal, untenable. Kamala Harris and her team knew from the months of mass mobilizations, mass organizing, and the immense support for ceasefire and for the Palestinian people coming out of the Democratic base that there was no way that she could be in the same room with Netanyahu and engage in any ovations or any applause. So that is a reason from our movements. We are the ones that created the space for Kamala Harris to decline to preside over the speech.
And talk about the organizing, Linda, that is going on today as we hear about busloads of people coming in from around the country. Yesterday, 400 Jewish activists, including a dozen rabbis, arrested in the Cannon Rotunda. Today, thousands.
This is the result of our young people across this country who have been leading mass mobilizations in every corner, in every city, including here in Washington, D.C. This protest is not just about Benjamin Netanyahu specifically. And the demand is to the United States government, arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. He is a war criminal, and the International Criminal Court is seeking to issue an arrest warrant. And there is leadership across the world that has said if Benjamin Netanyahu steps foot in our country, we will arrest him. Both Democrats and Republicans literally have invited and rolled out a blood-soaked red carpet for a war criminal. And we are here to send a message to the rest of the world that while our leadership cowers to a war criminal, we say Benjamin Netanyahu is unwelcomed here in the United States.
I wanted to bring Noah Grajewski into this conversation, Israeli-born member of Jewish Voice for Peace. She was there yesterday in the Cannon Rotunda as hundreds of people got arrested on the eve of Netanyahu's address. Can you talk about also the hostage family protest outside? They, too, were calling for Netanyahu and for the U.S. to immediately sign off on this ceasefire deal and to bring the hostages home. You yourself know one of the hostages in Gaza right now.
I do. Thank you so much for having me, Amy. So my cousin's very close friend, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, was 23 years old when he was taken hostage from a dance and music festival on October 7th. We don't know if he is currently alive. And while I can't speak for the immediate families of the hostages, what I can say is that it is clear that while this genocidal war campaign is waged against Gazans and against Palestinians and has killed over 39,100 people, probably many more, our hostages are being held in Gaza as well, and their lives are in danger, both in terms of how they're being treated as hostages and because they are in a war zone where there are an extraordinary number of bombs dropping and an incredible amount of violence. We don't know if our family's friend Hirsch is alive. We pray that he is. But ending this genocidal war campaign, while it will most, of course, positively affect Gazans, Palestinians in the West Bank as well, Palestinians in the Palestinian diaspora, will also protect Israelis, both Israeli hostages and Israeli citizens.
And Noah, could you talk to us about your own family's history? You're a Palestinian Jew, multiple generations in Palestine?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So the phrase Palestinian Jew is not one that is widely known and used to my knowledge, but it is used to describe the small percentage, probably around 1 to 2%, of Jewish people and Jewish community that lived in the region of Palestine long before the State of Israel was established. My family has been in the region of Palestine for hundreds of years before the State of Israel was established, for most of those generations in the city of Jerusalem. My Jewish family members spoke Arabic, lived in integrated communities with Palestinians who are both Muslims and Christians. And so something that I think about often is how in 1948, during the establishment of the State of Israel, many people that my grandmother, great-grandfather, great-grandmother were friends with, were colleagues with, worked with, people who worked for them, were displaced from their homes, their neighbors, their dear friends. In fact, my grandmother has told me that my great-grandfather worked tirelessly to try to bring people who were close to their family, who were Palestinian Christians and Muslims, back into Jerusalem after 1948 unsuccessfully. And so when I see ceaseless bombs dropping, famine escalating, viruses spreading among refugees in Gaza, and violence against refugees in the West Bank, I feel personally both responsible and implicated, because the same Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, and Christian families and their descendants who protected my Jewish family for generations and who were good neighbors to my Jewish family for generations, I imagine are those who are being slaughtered. And while they were my grandmothers and great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers' friends and neighbors, and while they were at times protected by their friends and neighbors, and allowed to gain economic security and a fair and equal standing within society, I feel that it is my responsibility as the descendant of my lineage to make sure to be vocal and take risks to protect their safety.
Democratic Congressmember Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, said in a statement, quote, Netanyahu's a war criminal committing genocide against the Palestinian people. It's utterly disgraceful. Leaders from both parties have invited him to address Congress. He should be arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court. Make no mistake, this event is a celebration of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. It's a sad day for our democracy when my colleagues will smile for a photo op with a man who's actively committing genocide, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib said. Linda Sarsour, we're going to end with you. While Kamala Harris is not there today, not presiding over this joint session of Congress, and many dozens of Congress members and senators are boycotting. She will meet with him tomorrow, as will President Biden. Your final thoughts, what do you want her to say?
I just want to make sure that we put this on the record that Joe Biden is also a war criminal. So I was not even surprised to see that there was an invitation to Benjamin Netanyahu to address Congress. And yes, Kamala Harris will be meeting privately with Benjamin Netanyahu, and we want her to say the things that need to be said. Kamala understands what is needed. And if she wants to become the next president of the United States of America, she has to demonstrate to our base, to Arab and Muslim and Palestinian American voters, to pro-ceasefire voters across the country, that she is going to disassociate from the policies of Joe Biden. She has to demand a permanent ceasefire, no temporary ceases, we want a permanent ceasefire. We also want the release of hostages, including Palestinian hostages. That is very important demand that Kamala Harris needs to present to Benjamin Netanyahu. And she also needs to support the an increased aid to the Palestinian people. There is famine, there is disease that is outbreak all across the Gaza Strip. So we need to make sure that all routes are open. And Kamala has to reaffirm her commitment to the self-determination of the Palestinian people. We will not take anything less, and we will continue to push her on an arms embargo. We have had support from members of Congress in ways we've never seen before. We need to stop all military aid to Israel, and we know that we have the support of the American people in this. The people in this country are suffering economically. Instead of sending billions of our taxpayer dollars to bomb and kill Palestinian men, women, and children, let's keep that money at home and help alleviate the suffering of the American people. So we're watching Kamala Harris. We want to see what she's going to do. We want to see if she's different than Joe Biden, because I will tell you this much. The Democratic Party knew that it was untenable to keep Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, that they were going to lose key states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania because our communities were not going to vote for a war criminal. And so our movements right now are wait and see with Kamala Harris over the next few weeks to see how she is going to be different than Joe Biden on Gaza. The killing continues. Over 90 people in Khan Yunis just in the last 24 hours were slaughtered. And we want this to end now. To address Congress. And yes, Kamala Harris will be meeting privately.
Okay, so I was saying earlier that there was a talk by Bernie Sanders who addressed Congress to say what he thought they should consider if they're going to be bothered to attend this speech with Netanyahu, which he is not going to attend, and for obvious reasons, he doesn't stand for the Netanyahu invitation, and so here's why.
Same subject. Madam President, tomorrow, Wednesday, will be a unique moment in congressional history. Throughout the many years of our country, leaders from dozens of countries with all kinds of political backgrounds and persuasions have been invited to address a joint session of Congress. To the best of my knowledge, however, tomorrow will be unique in bringing Prime Minister Netanyahu to address a joint meeting of Congress. It will be the first time in American history that a war criminal has been given that honor. Frankly, this invitation to Netanyahu is a disgrace and something that we will look back on with regret. With this invitation, it will be impossible, with a straight face, for the United States to lecture any country on earth about human rights and human dignity. Madam President, as you well know, along with Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and several others, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been credibly accused of war crimes by the International Criminal Court, the ICC. That court may soon issue arrest warrants for Sinwar and Netanyahu. The case against Sinwar and his Hamas accomplices are clear. They were organizers of the horrific October 7th terrorist attack on Israel that began this war and involved the mass murder of 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, the taking of hostages, and sexual violence. These war crimes are well documented, and very few people would dispute the merits of these charges. The ICC's prosecutors' charges against Netanyahu are also well-founded. The charges focus on the starvation of civilians as a method of war, as well as intentional attacks against the civilian population. Specifically, the prosecutor says that Netanyahu is responsible for, quote, depriving civilians of objects indispensable to their survival, including willfully impeding relief supplies as provided for under the Geneva Conventions." End of quote. A separate UN Independent Commission of Inquiry likewise found that both Hamas and the Israeli military have committed war crimes since October 7th, leading to widespread civilian deaths. The Commission said the Israeli military's, quote, "intentional use of heavy weapons with large destructive capacity in densely populated areas constitutes an intentional and direct attack on the civilian population, particularly affecting women and children." End of quote. Madam President, I think we all agree that Israel had the right to defend itself against the horrific Hamas attack on October 7th. But Netanyahu's extreme right-wing government has, since that attack, waged what amounts to a total war against the entire Palestinian people, making life unlivable in Gaza and killing tens of thousands. These actions have trampled on international law, on American law, and on basic human values. Madam President, I understand that the mass media and many of us in Congress have been preoccupied in recent weeks with the awful assassination attempt against former President Trump and the changes at the top of the Democratic presidential ticket. But while all that is going on, it is absolutely irresponsible for us to turn our backs on one of the worst humanitarian disasters in modern history, especially when that disaster has been aided and abetted by U.S. taxpayer dollars and weapons. In other words, it's not just the Israeli government, it is us and our money and our weaponry as well. Madam President, let us be clear. Let us be very clear as to what is going on in Gaza right now. Since this war began, among a population of 2.2 million people, at least 39,000 Palestinians have been killed and 89,000 injured, 60% of whom are women, children, or elderly people. Most observers believe that the death toll is much higher because thousands of people remain buried under the mountains of rubble. Their bodies have not yet been recovered. Madam President, some 1.9 million people out of a population of 2.2 million have been driven from their homes. 90% of the population. Take a deep breath. 90% of the population driven from their homes. The vast majority of these desperate and poor people have now been displaced not once, not twice, but in some cases 4 or 5 times, herded around like cattle. Just yesterday, Israel announced another evacuation order for Khan Yunis, and 150,000 people were forced to flee on a moment's notice. Just yesterday. Madam President, when we talk about housing in Gaza, it's not just that people have been displaced time and time again. More than 60% of Gaza's housing has been damaged or destroyed, including 221,000 housing units that have been completely destroyed. Where are these people going to go to if and when this war ever ends? And with that housing destruction, more than 1 million people remain permanently homeless. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped out. Today, more than 1 million Palestinians, almost half of the population of Gaza, are living in tents, trying to find shelter, trying to find protection from the intense summer heat in that area. But, Madam President, it is not just the housing that has been destroyed. Gaza's civilian infrastructure has also been devastated. water, and sewage systems have been made inoperable, and the result, raw sewage is running through the streets of Gaza, spreading disease, and there is very little clean water. Many roads are impassable, and there is virtually no electricity now in Gaza. But it's not just the housing that's been destroyed, not just the infrastructure that has been destroyed. Madam President, Gaza had 12 universities, schools of higher learning. Every single one of those universities has been bombed. And 88% of all school buildings have been damaged. In other words, under Mr. Netanyahu's leadership, the entire educational system in Gaza has been annihilated. In fact, 540 people have been killed while sheltering in UN schools. But, Madam President, it's not just the housing that's been destroyed, not just the infrastructure of Gaza that has been destroyed, not just the educational system which has been destroyed. At a time when almost 90,000 people are dealing with war-related injuries in Gaza, including many, many children who have lost their arms and their legs, who are suffering all kinds of diseases. The healthcare system in Gaza has been systematically obliterated. 21 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are completely out of service, and the remainder can only partially function. The World Health Organization has recorded more than 1,000 attacks on healthcare facilities since October 7th. As a result, disease is spreading due to shortages of clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. Cases of hepatitis, dysentery, and other infections are on the rise, and cases of polio have now been detected. Malnourished women struggle to breastfeed their newborns. Formula is inaccessible, and even when available, cannot be used without reliable sources of clean water. So the tiniest children and their mothers suffer as a result. But, Madam President, it's not just the displacement of 1.9 million people. It's not just the mass destruction of housing. It's not just the obliteration of the infrastructure. It's not just the destruction of the educational system. It's not just the annihilation of the healthcare system in Gaza that we are seeing. It is even worse than that. And I hope that my colleagues who attend Mr. Netanyahu's remarks on Wednesday remember this as they rise time and time again to give him standing ovations. As a result of Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid, people in Gaza are now starving to death. So remember, when people stand up and applaud, children, women, innocent people in Gaza are now starving to death. According to the best available research, drawing on leading experts from the UN and other aid organizations around the world, some 495,000 Palestinians face starvation. These groups estimate that more than 50,000 children require treatment for acute malnutrition and are at risk of starving to death. At least 30 documented, and I suspect it's a lot higher number than that, have already starved to death. So when you stand up and applaud that guy, remember the starving children that he has created. But even those who get the life-saving care they need, the children, will carry the scars of this disaster for the rest of their lives. As every psychologist will tell you, a child's brain develops fastest in the first 2 years of life. and childhood malnutrition does lifelong cognitive and physical damage. That is what Netanyahu is doing to the children of Gaza. And I would ask my colleagues to stop for a moment and also think about the psychological damage this war has done to the children there. Imagine being a child living with the constant buzzing of drones above your head, wondering whether those drones are going to rain fire and bullets onto your home, wondering if they might strike you at any moment. Imagine being a little 5-year-old, witnessing your relatives killed, your neighborhood destroyed. Think about being a 10-year-old, going hungry night after night and searching around for water and for food to survive. Think about being pushed from one place to another, not knowing where you'll be tomorrow, carrying your little belongings, your few belongings through streets, running with sewage amid piles of rubble and trash. That is what Mr. Netanyahu, the man Congress is honoring tomorrow, has done to the children of Gaza. According to the UN and virtually every humanitarian organization functioning in Gaza, Israel has intentionally blocked humanitarian aid, including food, water, and medical supplies, from reaching the desperate people in Gaza. And let us be clear, there is no excuse for this. Blocking humanitarian aid, killing aid workers, and creating the conditions for starvation. These are not only acts of extreme cruelty, but they are clear violations of both U.S. and international law. They are war crimes. They are war crimes. And Netanyahu heads the government that has enacted these policies. So tomorrow, Madam President, when Netanyahu comes before Congress, I hope that for 1 second, the members who attend will focus just for a second on the starving children in Gaza. I hope while they applaud that they will think about the hundreds of aid workers killed, the dozens of hospitals bombed, the housing destroyed, and the universities obliterated. Madam President, when Mr. Netanyahu rises to speak tomorrow, I also hope that my colleagues remember that all this death and destruction is not just the unfortunate byproduct of a brutal war. Revenge and destruction are the explicit policy of Netanyahu's extremist right-wing government. 2 days into the war, 2 days after October 7th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, quote, this is a direct quote, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly," end of quote. And that is exactly how they have pursued this war. They define the Palestinian people as human animals. And tragically, they have acted consistent with that view. Madam President, let us remember and understand that the Israel of today is not the Israel of the past. It is now run by a right-wing extremist government. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, the man who oversees the police, has long advocated for the forcible expulsion of Palestinians from the region. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, the man responsible for the occupied West Bank, is also an extreme racist and has called for the expulsion of Palestinians from the land. He has called for segregated hospital wards for Jews and Arabs because, quote, Arabs are my enemies, end of quote. And that is the man who is in charge of the occupied West Bank. And that is the current Israeli finance minister as well. Madam President, it should come as no surprise that this extremist government, in addition to destroying Gaza, has overseen record Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank in violation of international law and commitments to the United States. Israeli forces and vigilante settlers have killed more than 500 Palestinians in the West Bank since October 7th, including 131 children. Just last week, the International Court of Justice issued a ruling on the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. A panel of 15 accomplished judges from around the world confirmed what most of the world has long known: that occupation is illegal and must end. I know that there are some here in Congress, not many, but some, who have condemned Netanyahu and his extremist government. But condemning Netanyahu is not enough. We cannot condemn a prime minister who the ICC considers to be a war criminal, while at the same time continuing to provide his government with tens of billions of dollars in military aid. That is hypocrisy at its worst. Just today, Madam President, I'm happy to say that 7 major trade unions here in the United States, including the Association of Flight Attendants, the American Postal Workers Union, the International Union of Painters, the National Education Association, the Service Employees International Union, the United Auto Workers, and the United Electrical Workers, some of the largest unions in America, representing some 6 million workers, sent a letter to President Biden calling on him to immediately halt all military aid to Israel. And they are absolutely right. Netanyahu is a right-wing extremist and a war criminal who has devoted his career to killing the prospects of a two-state solution and lasting peace in the region. He should not be welcomed to the United States Congress. On the contrary, his policies in Gaza and the West Bank should be roundly condemned, and his right-wing extremist government should not receive another nickel from U.S. taxpayers. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Hey, I'm going to minimize this for a moment. There was a couple of other things I wanted to also kind of just give a quick note of. Here's something that seems to have lost its momentum as far as awareness and spot in the news, and that's the war in Ukraine. And I know that Ukrainian people are really trying to um, still live their somewhat of a normal life, if that's even possible in such a state. But they just recently had a music festival as a way of kind of just celebrating and trying to hold on to a little bit of normalcy. And there's a little segment on that that I'm just going to share with you here.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 brought much of the country's cultural life to a standstill.
Hold on, wrong place.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 brought much of the country's cultural life to a standstill, with major events like big music concerts cancelled until now. DW's Max Zander reports from a 3-day rock festival that just took place in the capital, Kyiv.
For many people in Kyiv, there is little to look forward to this summer. But for music lovers, there is this. This is Atlas United, Ukraine's largest music festival. Revived this year despite the war. 3 days of music, inside and in front of a shopping mall. Ukrainian rock band Boombox is headlining the festival.
Atlas is a breath of fresh air in a time of war.
Before it was easy to rock, but now the mood is very depressed, which is bad for work, and we have to resist.
We have no other time to live and celebrate, so we should celebrate life and show everyone that despite the war, our life continues.
This is the largest gathering in Ukraine during this war. More than 60,000 people are expected to attend Atlas Weekend, not even 2 weeks after the latest large-scale attack by Russia that killed many here in Kyiv and across the country.
The shopping mall underground car park can serve as a bomb shelter for 20,000 people. Pretty much everyone expected to attend daily. There's even a stage down here, and there's merchandise for sale. It's almost like any festival, just that here, military units are selling, promoting, and collecting donations.
I've got a sticker with a hat and a little badge to support the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade.
The goal is to collect 100 million grivnas. That's about 2.3 million euros for the military.
In the 3rd year of the war, it's much harder to raise funds now than in the 1st or 2nd, because there's a certain fatigue, and a financial fatigue too.
Talking to us during rehearsal, Boombox singer Andriy Khlyvnyuk had just returned from the front line, where he serves in a combat unit of the National Police.
It's not about rock and roll anymore, but I feel like I'm representing the country.
Boombox had permission to leave the country, and earlier this year spent 3 weeks playing concerts in the US and Canada to shine a light on the war in Ukraine and raise money.
85–90% supported by the donations people do. In the modern warfare, things changed a little bit, so you need a lot more different devices to stay alive and to do the job well.
Some criticized the festival going ahead despite the war, but Khlyvnyuk argued in favor.
You don't want to come back to a monastery. You want to come back home when you're full of life, where people smile when there's music. Our life without music is not worth fighting for, actually.
This weekend, Atlas United raised funds and smiles. And most importantly, there was no attack. Money is still coming in for the military.
Since she was first reported missing in Wyoming earlier this month until her remains were found later, the case of 22-year-old Gabby Petito has captured widespread media attention. But tens of thousands of people are reported missing or murdered every year in the U.S., and people of color don't get nearly the same level of attention, particularly Indigenous and Native Americans. Amna Nawaz has our conversation.
Judy, in Wyoming alone, 710 Indigenous people were reported missing between 2011 and 2020. In fact, although Indigenous people make up only 3% of the state's population, they accounted for more than 21% of homicide victims over the last decade. And the problem is not limited to Wyoming. Native women are murdered at rates 10 times the national average, a pattern that's reflected in a report from Abigail Echo Hawk. She's the chief research officer for the Seattle Indian Health Board and the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute. She joins me now. Abigail, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for making the time. You have called it a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Just give us a sense of scale and scope. What are we talking about?
We're talking about a crisis that didn't just start 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but one that has started and has been going on for more than hundreds of years. We have seen Native women go missing and murdered at astronomical rates. But despite knowing this within our communities and having the stories, we see an underreporting of them in the data, which makes it harder for us to advocate for and to show the disparity that exists in our communities and the loss of our loved ones.
Tell me why that underreporting is happening. What part of the system is failing?
In 2018, my organization put out a report in which we found that law enforcement agencies were either not collecting race and ethnicity of victims. We found database systems that would default to white if race and ethnicity wasn't collected, or they would visually look at somebody and decide what their race and ethnicity is. And as a result of that, we are finding a complete underreporting. And in fact, I've actually seen Native families having to fight to have their young relatives classified correctly because somebody mistook them for another race and they weren't reported as American Indian or Alaska Native. It's a systematic problem, and as a result of that, we have all of the stories of our communities, but we fight to show it in the data.
Tell me about what you hear from families about their missing loved ones, their murdered loved ones. What kind of stories do you hear from them about the issues they run into in reporting this and in getting justice?
We often will hear stories of individuals who attempt to report their loved ones missing, and officers will tell them, well, maybe she just ran away. Was she out drinking? Does she do sex work? We see the prejudices and stereotypes against Indigenous peoples and people of color play out in the underreporting because nobody's listening to us. We also see a maze of jurisdiction that exists only for Indigenous peoples in this country because of the laws that exist on tribal lands. I worked with a family where they actually spent 3 days of law enforcement trying to decide who had jurisdiction. And in that 3 days, their loved one remained missing and nobody was looking for them.
You mentioned these jurisdictional issues, and a lot of people think, well, that's just limited to when you're talking about tribal lands versus non-tribal lands. But your report was based on 71 urban cities across 29 states. So is this an issue regardless of where you live?
Absolutely. And we see this systematic issue playing out as a result of institutional and structural racism. In 2018, I put out another report related to high rates of sexual violence against American Indian, Alaska Native women in the city of Seattle. Out of the 94% of the women we talked to, 94% of them had been sexually assaulted in their lifetime, but only 8% of them saw a conviction of their rapist within the justice systems. We see a lack of accountability. We see a lack of investigation. And again, the systematic issues that place the blame of our victimization on our community instead of looking at why are we being targeted and why are we being victimized at such high rates.
Abigail, we're talking about this because of this intense media interest in the case of Gabby Petito. It's part of what our late NewsHour anchor and colleague Gwen Ifill once referred to as missing white women syndrome, right? The spotlight that's granted to white women, but not often to women of color. Your organization has actually studied that, right? The comparison between how these stories are treated. What did you find?
In our report, we actually found of the cases that we looked at, 95% of them weren't covered in the media. And this didn't mean that there weren't videos. It didn't mean that there wasn't active ways to put this in the media. It's just nobody's cared. And I actually contributed to the report in Wyoming that showed more than 700 people missing. And that report, which came out in January of this year, again, had very little coverage. And as the Indigenous community, we mourn for the family of anybody whose loved one goes missing and murdered. But what we demand is equity in this kind of coverage, because the lives of our women also matter.
In just the few seconds we have left, what does it take to fix this, to change this?
We need to see not only media coverage, but we need to see changes in policies. We need to see programming and interventions to understand that as Native women and Native people, we aren't higher risk of going missing and murdered because there's something wrong with us. We are at higher risk because there are systems of inequity in this country that place us at higher risk. And those are the systems we have to address. And it's going to take the entire community of the United States to come together and do that with us.
That is Abigail Echo Hawk, director of the Urban Indian Health Institute, joining us tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone knows Disney's Pocahontas, a movie that highlights some amazing portrayals of connections to nature, with a strong female protagonist. While inspiring, this was not the case. Pocahontas, also known as Matoaka, in reality was taken from her tribe and held for ransom as a bartering tool by English colonists at just 16 years old. To protect her tribe, she agreed to marry an Englishman as her last effort to keep the peace. She was then stripped of her culture, forced into Christianity, and murdered not long after bearing a child. This disregard for her life can be traced back to the basic prejudice against Indigenous lives, manifesting as a complete disregard for the value of Indigenous lives that the colonizers brought to this land from the beginning. This happened over 400 years ago, yet even now, Indigenous women and girls are still going missing, and not much is being done to stop it. Over 5,500 Indigenous women and girls are missing and murdered in the United States and Canada every year. And more than 84%, 1.5 million Indigenous women experience violence in their lifetimes, because the laws that were set up to govern them reflected those same inhumane attitudes and values which the tribal governments had to abide by. They achieved this by making the tribes both sovereign, meaning they had their own government, and dependent, which means they were also controlled by federal law. Additionally, the U.S. government created barriers preventing justice for crimes committed on tribal land and to tribal citizens, which were hidden in jurisdictions of local, state, federal, and tribal law. Many of these laws are still in use today and directly relate back to what is happening to these women and girls. First, the Major Crimes Act of 1885 mandated that all violent crimes committed on tribal lands were to be prosecuted by the federal government, which means that the U.S. government doesn't need to prioritize the tribe's needs, and that the tribes cannot make decisions without the U.S. government. Then there was Public Law 280 of 1953, which gave partial or total control to the state over tribes within their boundaries. This was a response to the tribe's pleas, but instead of giving control back to the Indigenous people, they gave the states control over their judicial and criminal system. It's important to remember that up until this point, the Indigenous people didn't have a guaranteed right to vote until the 1970s. They had no say over who was in the government that was controlling them. The third law is the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. This law states that Native governments cannot prosecute for more than $5,000 in fines and 1 year of jail time a person of their own tribe, even for a violent crime. They can't prosecute a non-Native person at all. They have to hand the case back to the U.S. government. By comparison, the average prison sentence for rape handed down by state or federal courts ranges from 8 to 13 years. This law was eventually combined with a new law called the Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010, which included 7 improvements to the Indian Civil Rights Act. These improvements finally gave Indigenous tribes the ability to prosecute criminals, but only of Indigenous descent. These laws still prevented significant consequences for non-Native perpetrators. While these laws allowed prosecution of non-Native suspects, it still had to be done at the state and federal level, and those courts rarely followed through. As a result, these criminals targeted Indigenous women living in these areas because they knew they could get away with their crimes in those jurisdictions. Because of strict laws preventing high-stakes consequences to non-Native persons, non-Native perpetrators target Indigenous women specifically living in these areas. They know they can get away with their crimes in those jurisdictions. In 2018 alone, the Urban Indian Health Institute reported 5,712 missing Indigenous women and girls, with only 116 of them registered in the DOJ database, while the other 5,596 cases were turned into cold cases. The cases that were registered and transferred to state or federal court took years to get any form of justice, with only that 3-year sentence, the same as a petty crime. Everyone deserves the right to safety. The creation of a better, safer environment and livelihood is important. The U.S. needs to start prioritizing the lives of these women. Tribal jurisdictions need full authority and resources in order to protect their people, and the determination of a crime being fully charged and prosecuted should be the same for non-natives on and off of their lands.
My mother's child dances in darkness and sings heathen songs by the light of the moon, and watches the stars and renames the planets, and dreams she can reach them with a song and a broom. I am my mother's savage daughter, the one who runs barefoot, cursing sharp stones. I am my mother's savage daughter. I will not cut my hair, I will not lower my voice. We are all brought forth out of darkness into this world through blood and through pain. And deep in our bones the old songs are waking, so sing them with voices of thunder and rain. We are our mother's savage daughters, the ones who run barefoot, cursing sharp stones. We are our mother's savage daughters. We will not cut our hair, we will not lower our voice.
shamefully accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza. This is utter, complete nonsense. It's a complete fabrication. Israel has enabled more than 40,000 aid trucks to enter Gaza. That's 500,000 tons of food. And that's more than 3,000 calories for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. If there are Palestinians in Gaza who aren't getting enough food, it's not because Israel is blocking it, it's because Hamas is stealing it. So much for that lie, but here's another. The ICC prosecutor accuses Israel of deliberately targeting civilians. What in God's green earth is he talking about? The IDF has dropped millions of flyers, sent millions of text messages, made hundreds of thousands of phone calls to get Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. But at the same time, Hamas does everything in its power to put Palestinian civilians in harm's way. They fire rockets from schools, from hospitals, from mosques. They even shoot their own people when they try to leave the war zone. A senior Hamas official, Fatri Hamad, boasted, listen to this, he boasted that Palestinian women and children excel at being human shields. His words, excel at being human shields. What monstrous evil. For Israel, every civilian death is a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy. They actually want Palestinian civilians to die so that Israel will be smeared in the international media and be pressured to end the war before it's won. This would enable Hamas to survive another day and, as they vowed, to carry out October 7th again and again and again. Well, I want to assure you, no matter what pressure is brought to bear, I will never allow that to happen. The vast majority of Americans have not fallen for this Hamas propaganda. They continue to support Israel. And I want to say thank you, America, and thank you, senators and House members who continue to support us, continue to support Israel, continue to support the truth and see through the lies. But as for the minority that may have fallen for Hamas's cons job, I suggest you listen to Colonel John Spencer. John Spencer is head of urban warfare studies at West Point. He studied every major urban conflict. I was going to say in modern history. He corrected me, no, in history. Israel, he said, has implemented more precautions to prevent civilian harm than any military in history and beyond what international law requires. That's why, despite all the lies you've heard, the war in Gaza has one of the lowest ratios of combatants to non-combatants casualties in the history of urban warfare. And you want to know where it's lowest in Gaza? It's lowest in Rafah. In Rafah. Remember what so many people said? If Israel goes into Rafah, there'll be thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of civilians killed. Well, last week, I went into Rafah. I visited our troops as they finished fighting Hamas's remaining terrorist battalions. I asked the commander there, how many terrorists did you take out in Rafah? He gave me an exact number, 1,203. I asked him, how many civilians were killed? He said, Prime Minister, practically none, with the exception of a single incident where shrapnel from a bomb hit a Hamas weapons depot and unintentionally killed 24 people? The answer is practically none. You want to know why? Because Israel got the civilians out of harm's way, something people said we could never do, but we did it. These heroes here today, the heroic soldiers of Israel, should not be condemned for how they're conducting the war in Gaza. They should be commended for it. I want to thank all of you here today who forcefully opposed the false accusations of the ICC and stood up for the truth. These lies are not only libelous, they're downright dangerous. The ICC is trying to shackle Israel's hands and prevent us from defending ourselves. And if Israel's hands are tied, America is next. And I'll tell you what else is next. The ability of all democracies to fight terrorism will be imperiled. That's what's on the line. So let me assure you, the hands of the Jewish state will never be shackled. Israel will always defend itself. My friends, in the Middle East, Iran is virtually behind all the terrorism, all the turmoil, all the chaos, all the killing. And that should come as no surprise. When he founded the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini pledged, "We will export our revolution to the entire world." We will export the Islamic revolution to the entire world. Now ask yourself, which country ultimately stands in the way of Iran's maniacal plans to impose radical Islam on the world? And the answer is clear. It's America, the guardian of Western civilization and the world's greatest power. That's why Iran sees America as its greatest enemy. Last month, we heard a revealing comment, ostensibly about the war in Gaza, but about something else. It came from the foreign minister of Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, and he said this: "This is not a war with Israel. Israel," he said, "is merely a tool. The main war, the real war, is with America." Iran's regime has been fighting America from the moment it came to power. In 1979, it stormed the American embassy. It held scores of Americans hostage for 444 days. Since then, Iran's terrorist proxies have targeted America in the Middle East and beyond. In Beirut, they killed 241 U.S. servicemen. In Africa, they bombed American embassies. In Iraq, they supplied explosives to maim and kill thousands of American soldiers. In America, they actually sent death squads. They sent death squads here to murder a former Secretary of State and a former National Security Advisor. And as we recently learned, they even brazenly threatened to assassinate President Trump. But Iran understands that to truly challenge America, it must first conquer the Middle East. And for this, it uses its many proxies, including the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. Yet in the heart of the Middle East, standing in Iran's way, is one proud pro-American democracy, my country, the State of Israel. That's why the mobs in Tehran chant death to Israel before they chant death to America. For Iran, Israel is first, America is next. So when Israel fights Hamas, we're fighting Iran. When we fight Hezbollah, we're fighting Iran. When we fight the Houthis, we're fighting Iran. And when we fight Iran, we're fighting the most radical and murderous enemy of the United States of America. And one more thing. When Israel acts to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons that could destroy Israel and threaten every American city, every city that you come from, we're not only protecting ourselves, we're protecting you. My friends, if you remember one thing from the speech, remember this. Our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight. And our victory will be your victory. Ladies and gentlemen, that victory is in sight. Israel's defeat of Hamas will be a powerful blow to Iran's axis of terror. Another part of that axis, Hezbollah, attacked Israel on October 8th, a day after the Hamas attack. It has launched thousands of missiles and drones against us. 80,000 of our citizens in northern Israel evacuated their homes, becoming effectively refugees in their own land. We are committed to returning them home. We prefer to achieve this diplomatically. But let me be clear. Israel will do whatever it must do to restore security to our northern border and return our people safely to their homes. Last Friday, a third Iranian proxy, the Houthis, attacked Tel Aviv with a deadly drone. It exploded a few hundred feet from the American consulate, killing one person and injuring 9. On Saturday, I authorized a swift response to that attack. All our enemies should know this. Those who attack Israel will pay a very heavy price. And as we defend ourselves, on all fronts, I know that America has our back. And I thank you for it. All sides of the aisle, thank you. My friends, for decades, America has provided Israel with generous military assistance, and a grateful Israel has provided America with critical intelligence that saved many lives. We've jointly developed some of the most sophisticated weapons on earth. I choose my words carefully. We've jointly developed some of the most sophisticated weapons on earth that help protect both our countries. And we also help keep Americans' boots off the ground while protecting our shared interests in the Middle East. I deeply appreciate America's support, including in this current war. But this is an exceptional moment. Fast-tracking U.S. military aid can dramatically expedite an end to the war in Gaza and help prevent a broader war in the Middle East. In World War II, as Britain fought on the front lines of civilization, Winston Churchill appealed to Americans with these famous words: "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job." Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster. My dear friends, the war in Gaza could end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders, disarms, and returns all the hostages. But if they don't, Israel will fight until we destroy Hamas's military capabilities, end its rule in Gaza, and bring all our hostages home. That's what total victory means, and we will settle for nothing less. The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there to prevent the resurgence of terror, to ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. Gaza should have a civilian administration run by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel. That's not too much to ask. It's a fundamental thing that we have a right to demand and to receive. A new generation of Palestinians must no longer be taught to hate Jews, but rather to live in peace with us. Those twin words, demilitarization and de-radicalization, those two concepts were applied to Germany and Japan after World War II, and that led to decades of peace, prosperity, and security. Following our victory, with the help of regional partners, the demilitarization and de-radicalization of Gaza can also lead to a future of security, prosperity, and peace. That's my vision for Gaza. Now, here's my vision for the broader Middle East. It's also shaped in part by what we saw in the aftermath of World War II. After that war, America forged a security alliance in Europe to counter the growing Soviet threat. Likewise, America and Israel today can forge a security alliance in the Middle East to counter the growing Iranian threat. All countries that are at peace with Israel and all those countries who will make peace with Israel should be invited to join this alliance. We saw a glimpse of that potential alliance on April 14th. Led by the United States, more than half a dozen nations worked alongside Israel to help neutralize hundreds of missiles and drones launched by Iran against us. Thank you, President Biden, for bringing that coalition together. The new alliance I envision would be a natural extension of the groundbreaking Abraham Accords. Those accords saw peace forged between Israel and 4 Arab countries, and they were supported by Republicans and Democrats alike. We could call I have a name for this new alliance. I think we should call it the Abraham Alliance. I want to thank President Trump for his leadership in brokering the historic Abraham Accords. Like Americans, Israelis were relieved that President Trump emerged safe and sound from that dastardly attack on him, dastardly attack on American democracy. There is no room for political violence in democracies. That's Jerusalem, our eternal capital, never to be divided again. My dear friends, Democrats and Republicans, despite these times of upheaval, I'm hopeful about the future. I'm hopeful about Israel because my people, the Jewish people, emerged from the depths of hell, from dispossession and genocide. And against all odds, we restored our sovereignty in our ancient homeland. We built a powerful and vibrant democracy, a democracy that pushes the boundaries of innovation for the betterment of all humanity. I'm hopeful about America because I'm hopeful about Americans. I know how much the people of this country have sacrificed to defend freedom. America will continue to be a force for light and good in a dark and dangerous world. For free peoples everywhere, America remains the beacon of liberty its extraordinary founders envisioned back in 1776. Working together, I'm confident that our two nations will vanquish the tyrants and terrorists who threaten us both. As Israel's Prime Minister, I promise you this: no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the road ahead, Israel will not relent, Israel will not bend. We will defend our land, we will defend our people, we will fight until we achieve victory. Victory over liberty, rather victory of liberty over tyranny, victory of life over death, victory of good over evil. That's our solemn commitment. And we will continue to work with the United States and our Arab partners to transform a troubled region from a backwater of repression, poverty, and war into a thriving oasis of dignity, prosperity, and peace. In this noble mission, as in many others, Israel will always remain America's indispensable ally. Through thick and thin, in good times and in bad, Israel will always be your loyal friend and your steadfast partner. On behalf of the people of Israel, I came here today to say, thank you, America. Thank you for your support and solidarity. Thank you for standing in Israel, with Israel, in our hour of need. Together we shall defend our common civilization. Together, we shall secure a brilliant future for both our nations. May God bless Israel, may God bless America, and may God bless the great alliance between Israel and America forever.
Sigurli Swagwag, Galahindi Gets. So, what I'm going to do here, because I can see we actually, I can see the Surfs just went live, and they're covering Palestine and the protest as well. So I'm going to play one song here. And this is a song about really the intersectionality of colonialism from Turtle Island to Palestine. And it was done by a band from Six Nations called The Hallucination. They just released this actually just a few days ago. So I wanted to share this because I wondered if there would be an indigenous artist that would proactively put something out that really addressed this genocide in Palestine. And so they did this in this song. And the song is called Voices from the Rubble. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to put the raid call in for the into the chat, and then we'll go over and share the love in the Surfs channel, and because they definitely are covering the same type of information, and he's probably organized his talk a lot better than I have, because I didn't plan this actually. I was just this was kind of just on the spur of the moment decision to go live. Now, I might come back live later this evening to do a music stream, but so keep an eye on the alerts if that's the case. So I'm going to get my mug off the screen here so that you can see this. Again, this is The Hallucination, and the song is called Voices Through Rubble.
حرية لفلسطين. The premise of many horror films are haunted houses built over mass graves. The science fiction ones imagine aliens coming to colonize and enslave the earth. Westerns champion settlers over the indigenous. Projectionist archives of colonial exports as entertainment. Born of a concrete womb. Voices to rubble. Voices to rubble. Voices to rubble. Like rocks crying out. To sleep through bomb blast and awaken to dust. Born of a concrete womb. Voices to rubble. Voices to rubble. Voices to rubble.
So depressed on this topic that I'm like open to crumbs. Crumbs sound nice. Anything fucking sounds nice. Dark Native, thank you so much for the rating party of 19. Can everyone go to twitch.tv/darknative? It's spelled N-A